On the night of October 12th, under the strobing chaos of red and blue lights, critical care transport nurse Imani Hayes found her path blocked. Her ambulance, containing a life-sustaining pediatric oxygen tank, was trapped behind a police cordon set up for a minor fender bender. Her patient, a 7-year-old boy in acute respiratory failure, was less than 3 blocks away, gasping for air. When she attempted to cross the police tape to retrieve the equipment, Officer Rick Jennings of the 14th Precinct physically intercepted her, his mind already made up. He accused her of attempting to loot a crash scene, dismissed her credentials, and ignored her increasingly desperate pleas. This is the body cam footage of that encounter, a record of the moment when a police officer's prejudice became a weapon against a child's life. The flashing lights of the patrol car cast long, dancing shadows across the wet asphalt of Elm Street. It was a scene of controlled chaos, but the wrong kind of chaos for Imani Hayes. The two-car collision that had snarled traffic was minor: dented bumpers, deployed airbags, and wounded pride. No serious injuries. Her emergency, the real emergency, was unfolding silently in a small apartment just down the road. Imani, clad in dark blue scrubs still faintly smelling of antiseptic, approached the yellow tape. Her face was a portrait of exhaustion and fierce urgency. A long 12-hour shift was supposed to have ended an hour ago, but the call had come in just as she was clocking out. Pediatric patient, severe asthma attack, non-responsive to home nebulizer. Her partner, David, was with the boy now, doing everything he could with the limited gear in his jump bag. The specialized pediatric oxygen regulator and high-flow cannula they needed were locked in the back of their ambulance, now a captive vehicle behind a wall of officialdom. The officer standing guard at the tape was broad-shouldered and thick-necked, his posture radiating a kind of bored authority. His name tag read Jennings. "Excuse me, officer," Imani said, her voice steady and clear, projecting just enough to be heard over the crackle of police radios. "I need to get to my ambulance." "It's right there." She pointed to the large, clearly marked vehicle, its own emergency lights now switched off to avoid confusion. Jennings turned his head slowly, his eyes doing a quick, dismissive scan. He saw a black woman, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her expression strained. He saw the scrubs, but in the disorienting light of the emergency scene, his brain filtered them through a lens of suspicion. "This is a closed perimeter, ma'am," he said, his tone flat and final. "Nobody comes through, I understand that," Imani replied, keeping her hands visible, her posture non-threatening. "But I'm a critical care nurse. My partner is with a child in respiratory arrest 2 blocks from here. I have to get a pediatric oxygen tank from my vehicle. It will take me less than 1 minute." Jennings's lips curled into a faint, condescending smirk. "A nurse, huh? Right. Everyone's got a story tonight. The scene is closed. You need to step back." He made a shooing motion with his hand, as if dismissing a stray animal. The casual, ingrained disrespect was a familiar sting, but Imani didn't have time for anger. A child's brain cells were dying. "Officer, my name is Imani Hayes. CCT nurse with City Metro Ambulance. You can see the vehicle. You can run the plates. My partner is with a 7-year-old boy. His oxygen saturation is dropping. I am not asking to interfere with your scene. I am telling you I have a medical emergency that requires access to my equipment." She spoke with the clipped precision of a medical professional in crisis, each word a carefully chosen tool. But Jennings heard only argumentative noise. He saw her urgency not as a sign of a legitimate crisis, but as the frantic energy of someone trying to pull a fast one. "I don't care who you are," he said, stepping closer, using his physical presence to intimidate. "This tape means nothing gets in or out. Find another way around." "There is no other way around," Imani insisted, her voice rising slightly in frustration. "The street is blocked in both directions. Officer, I'm begging you. This is a child's life." The word begging seemed to fuel his sense of power. He puffed out his chest. "And I'm telling you to back away from the police line before I have to detain you for interference." He placed a hand on her shoulder, not just to guide her, but to push her, a clear assertion of dominance. The gesture was meant to put her in her place, to remind her who was in charge. But for Imani, it was the spark that burned away her pleading. The time for asking was over. The shove was firm, meant to unbalance and intimidate. Imani stumbled back a step, the officer's touch a jolt of casual contempt. For a split second, a hot, white flash of rage threatened to consume her composure. She thought of all the times she had been underestimated, dismissed, or treated as a threat in the very spaces where she worked to save lives. But then she thought of the little boy, his tiny chest struggling for each breath, and the rage cooled into a diamond-hard resolve. She planted her feet, her 5'7" frame suddenly seeming as immovable as a mountain. Her eyes, which had been pleading moments before, now held a cold, analytical focus. Jennings seemed to enjoy her momentary distress. See? Not so hard to follow instructions, is it? Now turn around and walk away. His voice was laced with a smug, patronizing tone that made her skin crawl. He was playing a game, and he thought he was winning. But Imani Hayes was no longer playing. She was executing a procedure. "Officer Jennings," she said, her voice dropping, losing all its previous warmth and inflection. It was now the voice she used in the back of the ambulance during a code, a voice of absolute, unassailable command. "You have just physically assaulted me. That is battery. More importantly, you are actively and knowingly obstructing the delivery of emergency medical services to a person in critical need. I am officially putting you on notice." Jennings blinked, the confident smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. The sudden shift in her demeanor was jarring. He had expected tears or angry shouting, the kind of emotional response he knew how to handle, how to use against a person. This cold, procedural language was something else. It was unnerving. "On notice? What the hell are you talking about?" he scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "You're the one breaking the law. It's called interfering with a police officer. And I'm about 1 second away from showing you exactly what that means." He unsnapped the keeper on his holster, a theatrical gesture of intimidation. Around them, a few bystanders who had been watching the car crash aftermath now turned their attention to the confrontation at the police tape. A smartphone camera lens glinted in the flashing lights. Imani ignored the threat. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a frantic, vibrating pulse against her leg. It was David. She knew without looking what it meant. The boy was getting worse. The timeline was collapsing. "The law you are violating, officer," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "is State Penal Code 1482. It makes it a criminal offense to willfully obstruct a certified emergency medical technician or nurse from discharging their duties. My patient is a 7-year-old minor. His name is Ben Carter. He is currently in the care of my partner, EMT David Chun, at 345 Oak Avenue, apartment 2B. His oxygen saturation, as of my last update, was 88% and falling. That constitutes a dire medical emergency. Your refusal to allow me to retrieve my equipment is a direct and proximate cause of his continued deterioration. Every second that passes, your personal and professional liability increases exponentially." She delivered the words like a diagnosis. Cold, factual, and damning. Each sentence was a carefully placed stone, building a wall of legal consequence around him. Jennings stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. The torrent of specific, verifiable information, the penal code, the patient's name, the address, the exact medical details, was like a volley of bullets tearing through his flimsy armor of authority. He was a beat cop accustomed to dealing with drunks and petty thieves, people who stammered, lied, or yelled. He was not prepared for a calm, articulate woman in scrubs who spoke like a prosecutor. You're making that up," he stammered, but the accusation lacked conviction. The confidence was leaking out of him, replaced by a growing unease. "You think you're so smart, throwing around numbers and big words? You're not a lawyer. You're just trying to get past my line." "You're right," Imani said, a flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm the person who will be testifying against you in a court of law. And so will my partner. And so will the boy's parents. And so will the medical expert who explains to a jury exactly what happens to a child's brain and heart when it is deprived of oxygen, minute by agonizing minute." While you stood here protecting a dented fender, she took a deliberate step forward, back to the tape, reclaiming the ground he had forced her to yield. "Now, for the last time, are you going to let me get my equipment, or do you want to continue gambling with a child's life and your entire career?" The air crackled with tension. The officer was trapped, his arrogance warring with a dawning, terrifying realization that he had made a catastrophic mistake. Officer Jennings's face, illuminated by the rhythmic sweep of blue light, was a mask of confusion and anger. He was a hammer, and the world was full of nails. This woman, with her calm defiance and her clinical, cutting words, was not a nail. She was something else entirely, something he didn't know how to strike. His training and his prejudice screamed at him that she was a challenge to his authority, someone who needed to be put down. But a small, panicked voice in the back of his mind was screaming that she was telling the truth, and he was walking into a disaster of his own making. He chose to listen to the louder, more familiar voice of his own ego. "I'm not gambling with anything," he snarled, doubling down. "I'm securing a scene. That's my job. You are interfering. That's a crime. I've given you a lawful order to disperse. You've refused. You're disorderly. You're a threat." He was reciting a script, pulling words from the Academy playbook to rebuild the reality he preferred, one where he was the hero and she was the villain. A threat. Imani's laugh was short and completely without humor. It was a sharp, bitter sound. "Officer, the only threat here is your ignorance. The only crime being committed is your obstruction." Her phone buzzed again, a longer, more insistent vibration. She knew it was a call this time. She pulled it from her pocket, her movements slow and deliberate, so as not to be misinterpreted as reaching for a weapon. The screen lit up with David's name. She answered, putting it on speaker. "Imani, where are you?" David's voice was strained, breathless. In the background, a child's weak, wheezing gasps were terrifyingly audible, punctuated by the high-pitched alarm of a portable pulse oximeter. "His sats are at 84. Bradying down. I'm bagging him, but it's not enough. He's starting to go cyanotic. We need that high-flow O2 now, or we're going to lose him." The raw, unfiltered reality of the medical crisis flooded the space between Imani and the officer. The wheezing breaths, the frantic beeping. It was the soundtrack of impending death. It wasn't jargon anymore. It was real. Jennings's eyes widened. His gaze flickered from Imani's face to the phone and back again. The sound from the speaker was undeniable, a visceral truth that no amount of blustering could refute. The faces of the bystanders had turned from curious to horrified. The woman who had been filming now held her phone up with a new, determined purpose. "I'm on my way, David," Imani said into the phone, her voice a strange mix of soothing reassurance for her partner and cold fury for the man in front of her. "I'm being detained by an officer. Tell Ben's mother we are doing everything we can." She disconnected the call, the sudden silence amplifying the horror of what they had just heard. "Did you hear that, Officer Jennings?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "That is the sound of a child suffocating. That is the sound of your career ending. That is the sound a jury will hear, over and over again, played from your own body camera footage." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the thick, humid air. "Now, I am going to ask you one more time. Call your supervisor to this location. Now. And then you are going to get out of my way." The direct command, combined with the evidence from the phone call, finally broke through his wall of defiance. The swagger evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked pale and uncertain. He was in over his head, and he knew it. He fumbled for the radio on his shoulder, his hand shaking slightly. "Dispatch, send a supervisor to the Elm Street cordon," he said, his voice husky. He couldn't bring himself to say it was urgent. He couldn't admit the magnitude of his error. "Non-urgent," he mumbled, a last, pathetic attempt to control the narrative. Imani's eyes narrowed. "Urgent," she corrected him, her voice ringing with authority. "Tell them it is an urgent request regarding officer obstruction of an on-duty medical team during a pediatric code." Use those exact words. Jennings flinched as if struck. He looked at her, then at the growing crowd, then back at her. Trapped. He keyed the mic again, his voice barely a whisper. "Update that request," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Make it urgent. Officer, obstruction of medical personnel." He had finally said it. He had documented his own failure. The admission hung in the air, a confession broadcast for anyone listening on the channel to hear. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He was no longer the enforcer. He was the subject of an impending investigation. The wait for the supervisor felt like an eternity, each second stretching into a painful minute, marked by the phantom sound of a child's struggle for breath in Imani's mind. She stood her ground, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond Officer Jennings. She refused to look at him, to give him the satisfaction of seeing the turmoil she felt inside. Her professionalism was a shield, but beneath it, her heart hammered against her ribs with a frantic mixture of fear for her patient and a cold, simmering rage at the injustice. Jennings, on the other hand, couldn't stay still. He paced a short, 3-foot line, his boots scuffing the pavement. He'd glance at Imani, then quickly away, like a child caught doing something terribly wrong. He fiddled with his radio, adjusted his belt, and wiped a hand over his crew-cut hair. The bravado he'd worn so comfortably just minutes ago had been stripped away, leaving him exposed and twitching with nervous energy. He was a man watching his life unravel in real time, and the body camera on his chest was recording every damning second of it. The bystanders were no longer a passive audience. They had become a silent jury. Their phones were out, not just one or two, but a half-dozen, all pointed at the tableau of the rigid nurse and the crumbling cop. Someone in the small crowd murmured, "He's not letting her save a kid," loud enough for Jennings to hear. He flinched, his face flushing with a blotchy, red shame. A siren grew louder, this one with a different cadence than the others. A patrol sergeant's SUV nosed its way through the mess of vehicles and pulled up just outside the tape. The door opened, and a man with tired eyes and silver-flecked temples got out. His name tag read Peterson. He took in the scene with a quick, experienced glance. Jennings looking like a cornered animal, a calm but furious-looking woman in scrubs, and a semicircle of phone-wielding citizens. "Jennings, what in the Sam Hill is going on here?" Sergeant Peterson's voice was a low growl, the sound of a man who had been pulled from paperwork to deal with a problem he already knew he wasn't going to like. Jennings practically scurried over to him, eager to present his version of events before Imani could speak. "Sarge, I've got it under control. This woman, she was trying to breach the perimeter, claiming she was a nurse, making a scene. I was just maintaining scene security." He tried to make his voice sound confident and in control, but it came out thin and reedy. Before Peterson could respond to his subordinate, Imani stepped forward. She addressed the sergeant, not Jennings, effectively erasing him from the conversation. "Sergeant," she began, her tone respectful but firm, devoid of the emotion she'd shown earlier. "My name is Imani Hayes. I am a critical care transport nurse. My partner and I were dispatched to a pediatric patient in respiratory arrest. Our ambulance, number 307, is that vehicle right there," she pointed. "It contains essential, life-sustaining equipment we need to prevent that child from dying or suffering permanent brain damage. This officer," she gestured toward Jennings with a slight, dismissive tilt of her head, "has physically and verbally prevented me from accessing that equipment for approximately 7 minutes. He has ignored my credentials, dismissed the medical emergency, and accused me of being a criminal." Peterson's eyes narrowed, shifting from Imani to Jennings. He saw the stark contrast, the nurse's unwavering, factual recitation versus his officer's defensive, flustered posture. "She's lying, Sarge. She didn't show me any credentials," Jennings blurted out, a desperate, foolish lie. Imani didn't even flinch. She simply reached into the cargo pocket of her scrub pants and pulled out her wallet. She opened it, but she didn't show the hospital ID. She bypassed it, her fingers going to a different slot. She extracted a stiff, laminated card and held it out for the sergeant. "Officer Jennings is mistaken," she said, her voice dripping with ice. "I informed him of my status. I informed him of the law he was breaking. I am now informing you." Peterson took the card. The body cam would have shown his eyes widening as he read it. It wasn't a simple hospital ID. It was a State of America Emergency Management Agency credential identifying Imani Hayes as a sworn field operations member of the Disaster Medical Assistance Team. Her photo was next to a state seal and a list of authorizations that included access to any and all medical equipment and scenes during a declared emergency. "Jennings," Peterson said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, never taking his eyes off the ID card. "Did you see this?" The blood drained from Jennings's face. He stared at the card in his sergeant's hand as if it were a snake. I didn't. She didn't show me that one," he stammered. Peterson finally looked up from the card, his gaze landing on Jennings with the force of a physical blow. "You absolute, certifiable moron," he hissed, the words tight with fury. "You don't get to pick and choose which ID you like. When a medical professional declares a life or death emergency, you verify and you assist. You don't play gatekeeper with a child's life. What is wrong with you? The public dressing down, right in front of the cameras, was brutal. Jennings shrank under the weight of his sergeant's fury, his entire body seeming to collapse inward. The arrogant enforcer was gone, replaced by a chastened, terrified subordinate about to be fed to the wolves. Sergeant Peterson turned his back on the now wilting Officer Jennings, a clear and public dismissal. He handed the DMAT credential back to Amani, his expression a mixture of professional apology and profound exasperation. Nurse Hayes, I am deeply, profoundly sorry for my officer's conduct, he said, his voice resonating with sincerity. There is no excuse for this. None. He didn't wait for a response. He grabbed the radio from his own shoulder, his thumb mashing the transmit button. Dispatch, this is Sergeant Peterson, Unit 14 Adam. I need a path cleared from the Elm Street cordon to 345 Oak Avenue, Code 3. Have an officer escort Nurse Hayes' ambulance to that location immediately. All other units, stand by. We are facilitating an emergency medical response. The radio crackled with acknowledgments. The effect was instantaneous. Another officer, a young woman who had been directing traffic, jogged over, her face serious. Sarge, you need me to run escort? Yes, Peterson commanded. Get this nurse to her vehicle and then get her to her patient. Lights and sirens. Do not let anything slow you down. Go. Now. He then turned his full attention back to Jennings, his face a thundercloud. You. Stay right here. Don't move. Don't talk. We're going to have a long conversation when I get back. Imani gave the sergeant a single, sharp nod. There was no time for thanks or recriminations. Every second wasted was a victory for Anoxia. She turned and walked briskly toward her ambulance, the young officer jogging beside her, already speaking into her own radio to clear the path. As she passed Jennings, she didn't look at him. He was an obstacle that had been removed, a problem that had been solved. To her, in that moment, he had ceased to exist. He was just a ghost in a uniform, haunted by the consequences of his own prejudice. The body cam on Jennings's chest captured the scene perfectly. It recorded Imani's determined stride as she was escorted through the yellow tape he had guarded with such misplaced zeal. It recorded the other officer opening the ambulance door for her. It recorded the sight of Imani emerging seconds later, a green portable oxygen cylinder in one hand and a medical bag in the other. It recorded the ambulance roaring to life, its sirens suddenly screaming into the night, a sound of desperate hope. The last image it captured before Sergeant Peterson reached over and deactivated the camera with a furious jab of his finger was the ambulance pulling away, accelerating rapidly, its lights flashing a frantic rhythm as it disappeared down the street on its mission of life, a mission he had almost doomed. The silence that fell after the siren faded was heavy and suffocating. The bystanders slowly began to lower their phones, the immediate drama over. They exchanged hushed, angry words. Can you believe that cop? One person said. She told him, man. She told him it was a kid, said another. Sergeant Peterson let the silence hang for a long moment, forcing Jennings to stew in it. Then he spoke, his voice low and serrated. Give me your badge and your service weapon, Jennings. Jennings looked up, his eyes wide with panic. Sarge, please. I made a mistake. I thought she was... You thought she was what, Jennings? Peterson cut him off, his voice dangerously soft. A black woman in a hurry. So she must be a criminal? A looter? A liar? Is that what you thought? Did you even look at her? Or did you just see a stereotype you could bully? Jennings opened his mouth, then closed it. There was no answer he could give that wouldn't damn him further. I've seen your file, Rick. Peterson continued, the use of his first name making it sting even more. A few too many complaints about excessive force. A few too many misunderstandings that all seem to involve people of color. I've given you the benefit of the doubt. My mistake. But this is different. You didn't just bruise an ego tonight. You may have handed a child a death sentence. And you did it all while wearing this uniform. He gestured to his own sleeve patch. You did it with the authority this city gave you. And as of right now, you no longer have that authority. He held out his hand. With trembling fingers, Jennings unclipped his badge from his uniform shirt. The metal felt cold and heavy, a dead weight. He then unholstered his firearm, ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber as per procedure, and handed the weapon over, grip first. The sergeant took them without a word and dropped them into an evidence bag. "Internal Affairs will contact you tomorrow," Peterson said, his voice flat and official. "Go home. And I suggest you start looking for a very, very good lawyer." Jennings stood there, disarmed and stripped of his authority, a civilian in a police costume, watching his entire world crumble to dust on a wet city street. The aftermath played out with the grim inevitability of a medical chart tracking a terminal decline. Imani and David, with the crucial high-flow oxygen, managed to stabilize Ben Carter's vitals in the back of the racing ambulance. They intubated him, restored his oxygen saturation to a survivable level, and delivered him to the pediatric intensive care unit at University Hospital. But the damage was done. The 7 minutes of profound hypoxia, the 7 minutes Jennings had manufactured out of arrogance and bias, had left their mark. The boy survived, but he was not the same. He had suffered a moderate anoxic brain injury, a subtle but devastating thief that stole bits of his cognitive function, his short-term memory, and the bright spark that had defined him. When the doctors explained the prognosis to Ben's parents, they also had to explain the cause. They had to tell them that their son's future was permanently altered not just by an asthma attack, but by a delay, a preventable delay. Imani, sitting with the family in the sterile, quiet consultation room, had to recount the events at the police line. She did so with the same clinical precision she had used on Officer Jennings, but her voice was thick with a sorrow she could no longer contain. She watched their confusion turn to disbelief, and their disbelief to a pure, incandescent rage. The system that was supposed to protect them had, in its most casual and brutal form, harmed their child. The institutional response began almost immediately. Sergeant Peterson's report was a scathing indictment of his own officer's conduct. It was direct, detailed, and left no room for ambiguity. He attached the body cam footage as the primary exhibit. Within 48 hours, the bystander videos began to surface online. Spliced together, they told a powerful story. The first clips showed a calm nurse trying to reason with an aggressive cop. Later clips, from different angles, showed the officer's escalating hostility, his physical shove, and finally, the damning audio from Imani's phone call. The hashtag Justice for Ben Carter started trending on social media. News outlets picked up the story, contrasting the image of the stoic, professional nurse with the panicked, crumbling officer. The police department, facing a public relations nightmare, moved swiftly. Officer Rick Jennings was suspended without pay, pending the outcome of an internal affairs investigation that everyone knew had only one possible conclusion. The police union issued a pro forma statement about due process and the dangers of a trial by social media, but it was a half-hearted defense. The evidence was too clear, too public, and too damning. The officer's own camera had become the star witness for the prosecution. Imani found herself in a new and uncomfortable role. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a symbol. She was interviewed by internal affairs detectives, her deposition taken by city attorneys. She then met with a private law firm, the one the Carter family had retained. They sat in a polished mahogany conference room, a world away from the grit of an ambulance bay. The lead attorney, a sharp, empathetic woman named Sarah Jenkins, laid out the strategy for a civil suit. "Imani, your testimony is the foundation of this case," Sarah explained, her gaze direct. "Your professionalism under that kind of pressure was extraordinary. You didn't just save that boy's life in the end. You built the case that will hold that officer and his department accountable. The body cam footage is the lock, but you are the key." The lawsuit was filed 1 month later. It named Officer Rick Jennings personally and the city police department for negligent hiring, training, and supervision. It cited the specific statutes Imani had quoted on the street. It detailed the medical consequences of Jennings's actions. And it asked for damages to cover Ben Carter's lifelong medical care, his therapy, his special educational needs, and the immeasurable loss of his full potential. The price tag for 7 minutes of prejudice was set at $16 million. The city's lawyers knew they had no defense. The evidence was insurmountable. To take it to trial would be to risk a jury awarding an even higher, more punitive amount after viewing the footage. They moved to settle. Negotiations were swift. The final number agreed upon was a fraction of the original demand, but still a staggering sum, $16 million. It was enough to guarantee Ben would have the best care for the rest of his life. More importantly for the Carters and for Imani, the settlement came with a condition: the immediate and permanent termination of Rick Jennings's employment. His badge would not just be taken, it would be destroyed. The career he had used to menace and harm was over, ended by a lawsuit that his own actions had made unwinnable. The vindication was legal and financial, but for Imani, it was a hollow victory, paid for with a child's stolen future.